At dinner, Mom slid a white envelope across the table to my sister. $150,000 for her new house. Dad didn't hesitate. He just looked at me and said, "You're the failure. We invest in winners." The room went silent. Forks froze midair. Jessica smiled awkwardly, her cheeks flushed with pride, but she didn't say anything. Please stay with me as I tell you my story. And please don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. For a second, I thought I misheard him. My father had always been harsh, but this was different. This was a verdict. Mom didn't look up. She just refilled Jessica's glass like nothing had happened. I stared at the envelope on the table, crisp white against the polished wood, and realized that everything I'd ever done, every long night at the office, every degree I'd earned, every bridge I'd helped design, meant absolutely nothing to them. My entire life had been a quiet audition for their approval, and that night the final curtain fell. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "Dad, maybe." But he cut her off. "Your sister made smart choices," he said. "You chose stress and bad luck. We help people who make us proud." His words landed like stones in my chest. I forced a small smile, the kind that hides the breaking. "Got it," I said softly. Then I folded my napkin, placed it on the table, and stood up. Mom finally looked at me, her lips parting like she wanted to speak, but she didn't. She never did. The air outside was sharp, cold enough to sting. I stood on the porch, staring at the dark street, the quiet hum of the neighborhood. I could hear laughter inside, Jessica trying to lighten the mood, Dad saying something about investments and success. The sound faded behind the door, but the words kept echoing in my head. We invest in winners. I walked to my car slowly, each step heavier than the last. When I turned the key, my reflection stared back at me from the windshield, tired eyes, trembling hands, but underneath it, something else. Something that refused to die. Maybe it was pride or maybe anger, but it pulsed steady and hot in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even say goodbye. I just drove, past the neighborhood where I grew up, past the school where they never came to my science fairs, past the city limits where the mountains began to swallow the sky. By the time I hit the highway, my hands had stopped shaking. The farther I drove, the lighter I felt. Their words still burned, but they didn't own me anymore. That night, I didn't promise revenge or redemption. I promised something quieter, stronger. If they wouldn't see my worth, I'd build it myself, brick by brick, until the world couldn't look away. When I was a kid, I used to think love was something you could earn if you just worked hard enough. I built little bridges out of straws and string, fixed broken toys, and spent hours trying to make things stronger, better, useful. Every time I showed my parents, they barely looked up. But when Jessica won another crown at her beauty pageants, the living room turned into a celebration. Balloons, photos, laughter, like her success gave them oxygen. Mine was invisible. Once, I came home from the state science fair holding a first-place medal. I'd worked for weeks, making sure my bridge could hold a full textbook. I walked in glowing, waiting for them to be proud. Mom was brushing Jessica's hair. Dad was watching TV. When I showed them the medal, he said, "That's nice, honey," without taking his eyes off the screen. I remember standing there, holding that small circle of metal, and feeling it cool in my hand until it meant nothing. That was the night I learned silence can hurt more than anger. Years passed. Jessica became the family's shining star, business degree, fiancé, perfect smile. I built my career as an engineer, working long hours, paying my own way. They never noticed. They only called to talk about her. Somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting them to ask about me. I told myself I didn't need them, but deep down, I still wished they'd call just to say they were proud. That call never came. After I left their house that night, I poured everything into work. I thought success would fix the emptiness, but life had other plans. One gray morning, my manager called everyone into the conference room. The company had lost funding, and my name was on the layoff list. Just like that, years of effort vanished with a few words. I packed my things, walked out into the cold, and stood on the sidewalk, unsure what to do next. Denver felt huge and hollow. My apartment was small and quiet, filled with papers, sketches, and half-finished dreams. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that I'd start over, but the truth sat heavy in my chest. For the first time in years, I had no plan. I scrolled through my phone and opened the Bennett family group chat. The last photo they'd sent was Jessica standing in front of her new house, champagne in hand, Mom and Dad beside her. Their smiles looked complete, like the family was whole without me. I stared at that photo for a long time before typing a short message. Thank you for teaching me to stand alone, even if it hurt. Then I hit send. A moment later, I blocked every number, deleted the chat, and set the phone face down. The room felt too still, like the world had stopped moving. Outside, car lights blurred through the window. Inside, there was only the sound of my own breathing. For once, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, the city lights flickering across my face, realizing that silence wasn't my punishment anymore. It was my beginning. They had taken their love away. Now, I would learn to live without needing it. Silence was all they left me, so I would build from that. Finding a new job turned out to be harder than I thought. Every morning I sent out applications, and every night I checked my email, hoping for a reply that never came. My savings were shrinking, and the walls of my apartment started to feel smaller each day. One afternoon, I walked aimlessly through downtown Denver, trying to keep my thoughts quiet. That's when I saw a small, old cafe on the corner of an empty street. The sign read Harlan's Corner, the paint cracked and fading, a closed sign swinging in the wind. Through the window, I saw a man stacking chairs, moving slowly like someone who had done the same thing for years. I pushed the door open anyway. A bell rang weakly. He looked up, surprised. "We're not open," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I almost turned to leave, but something made me stay. The air smelled of burnt coffee and dust, like the place had stories trapped in it. "I used to come here in college," I said. "It looks different now." He smiled faintly. "That's a polite way to say it's falling apart." He looked at me closer, squinting. "You're Wendy Bennett, right? The engineer? I saw your name in the paper once, that bridge project downtown." I blinked. "Used to be an engineer," I said quietly. He nodded. "Well, I could use someone who knows how to fix things. I've got about $1,000 left in the budget. Can you make this place look alive again?" It wasn't much money. Not even close to enough to cover rent. But there was something in his tone, tired, hopeful, that pulled at me. I looked around at the faded walls, broken lights, and uneven floorboards. "Yeah," I said finally. "I can make it work." The next few weeks, that cafe became my whole world. I started by cleaning everything, floors, counters, windows so clouded they barely let light in. My hands were blistered by the second day, but I didn't care. I patched the walls, painted them a soft, warm color, and rearranged the furniture to make the room feel open. I rewired old lamps, turned mismatched chairs into a cozy corner, and used leftover wood from a nearby workshop to build new shelves. Harlan watched quietly most days, sometimes bringing me coffee or a sandwich. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words stuck. "You've got magic in your hands, kid," he said once, standing in the doorway as I hung a new light above the counter. "You make broken things feel wanted again." When I finally finished, the place didn't look new, it looked loved. The sunlight fell softly on the wooden counter, the smell of fresh paint mixed with roasted coffee, and the hum of conversation started to return as old customers wandered in. Harlan's smile that day was small but real. A week later, a local magazine featured the cafe. The article was short, just a few lines about a forgotten shop brought back to life by a young engineer who refused to give up. When I saw the photo, me behind the counter, jeans stained with paint, hair tied back, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I had built something with my own two hands, and it stood there, warm, open, alive. Maybe it wasn't the life I planned, but it was the first step towards something I could finally call my own. After finishing the cafe, word began to spread. People started calling me for small projects, fixing a porch, repainting a bakery, redesigning a flower shop. None of it paid much, but every job helped me feel a little more like myself again. My hands were always sore, my jeans always covered in dust, but I didn't mind. I liked seeing something broken become whole again. One morning, I got a call from a man named Mr. Hayes in Golden, Colorado. He said he needed help restoring an old brick house he bought for a retired veteran. The place had good bones, but needed serious work. It sounded like a challenge, and something inside me sparked again. I packed my tools, loaded my car, and drove west. Golden was quiet, the kind of town where mountains sat close enough to touch and time moved slower. When I arrived, the house looked tired but strong. Chipped paint, cracked windows, a porch sinking slightly to one side. A tall man stood by the gate, measuring a support beam. He looked up when I parked. "You must be Wendy," he said, wiping his hands. "Ethan Walker." He was the site engineer, steady and calm, the kind of person who didn't need to fill silence with words. "I liked that. You're the designer?" he asked. I nodded. "Then we better get started," he said with a faint smile. We worked side by side every day. The house had layers of dust and history. Some mornings, the air smelled like old wood and rain. Other days, like sawdust and paint. We repaired walls, replaced beams, and argued, kindly, about layouts. He liked precision, I liked warmth, and somehow the mix worked. We didn't talk much at first, just shared the rhythm of work. The scrape of a trowel, the buzz of drills, the sound of a ladder shifting against the wall. But silence has its own language. After a few weeks, we began to talk during lunch breaks. He told me he used to build bridges for the army before settling down here. I told him about Harlan's Cafe, how it gave me a reason to start again. He listened, really listened, without judging or interrupting. One afternoon, as I sketched a new design for the porch, he said quietly, "You don't need their approval, Wendy. You already built something they can't touch." I didn't say anything at first. Those words landed deeper than I expected. He didn't know the whole story about my family, but somehow he understood the part that mattered. The project took almost 2 months. By the end, the house looked alive again. Sunlight spilled through wide windows, the porch stood firm, and the air carried the smell of cedar. When Mr. Hayes walked through, his eyes filled with tears. "You gave him a home again," he whispered. That evening, Ethan and I sat on the porch we built, watching the sunset fade behind the hills. He handed me a bottle of water, his arm brushing mine for a second. The moment was quiet but full, not like the cold silence I grew up with, but the kind that feels safe. I looked at the glowing house and felt something I hadn't in years, peace. For the first time, someone saw me not as the girl who failed to impress her parents, but as the woman who could rebuild anything, even herself. One evening, after finishing a small renovation job, Ethan and I went to a quiet diner near the edge of town. The place smelled like coffee and rain, the kind of scent that settles your thoughts. We sat in a corner booth, both tired but satisfied after a long week of work. He stirred his coffee slowly and said, "What if we built something of our own? Not for a client, not for profit, just something that lasts." I looked at him, unsure what he meant. "Like what?" He leaned back, eyes steady. "A house that runs itself. Solar power, rainwater system, recycled materials, everything sustainable. A home that doesn't depend on anyone." The idea made my heart race. It sounded impossible and perfect all at once. I hesitated before saying, "That was my dream once." I smiled a little. "I told my dad about it years ago." He laughed, said it was a waste of time and that real engineers build skyscrapers, not fairy tale huts in the woods. Ethan didn't laugh. He just nodded and said, "Then maybe it's time you build it for yourself." His voice was calm, certain. There was no judgment in his tone, only belief. It had been a long time since anyone believed in me without expecting something in return. We started searching for land, something quiet and affordable. After weeks of looking, we found a small piece of property in Oregon, 5 acres of forest with a view of the ocean. It wasn't much, but it felt like possibility. The owner, An older man named George had planned to build a home there for his late wife. When he heard our plan, he said softly, "Make it something worth living in." He offered to lower the price. We put all our savings together, signed the papers, and just like that, we owned a piece of earth. It felt unreal. Standing on that empty plot, surrounded by tall pines and the sound of waves in the distance, I felt something shift inside me. The air was cold, but I couldn't stop smiling. Ethan set up a small folding table, spread out a blank sheet of paper, and handed me a pencil. "You're the designer," he said. "Start us off." For a moment, I just stared at the page. My hands trembled slightly. All the voices from the past tried to creep back in. My father's laughter, his words about how I'd never build anything meaningful. But I pushed them aside and drew a single line. It wasn't much, just the outline of a small cabin, simple and strong. Still, it felt like the start of something that belonged only to me. Ethan leaned over my shoulder, watching quietly. "That's the first line of the rest of your life," he said. We stood there until the sun slipped behind the trees. The paper fluttered in the wind, the pencil marks faint but real. I didn't know how hard it would be or how long it would take, but I knew one thing for sure. This was my chance to turn the dream they once mocked into something solid, something that would stand long after the laughter faded. The first morning on the land felt strange, almost too quiet. The wind moved through the trees, and the ocean hummed far in the distance. Ethan and I set up a tent and laid out our tools. There was no electricity, no comfort, just open sky and endless work ahead. I wasn't afraid. For the first time, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt like space to build something new. We started with the foundation. The ground was uneven, filled with rocks and roots that fought every inch we cleared. The first few days left my muscles sore, my hands covered in blisters. Still, I woke up each morning before the sun and pushed forward. The air smelled like pine and damp soil, and each swing of the hammer felt like proof that I was still standing. Ethan handled most of the measurements while I focused on the structure. We worked side by side, barely talking, but the silence between us was steady and warm. Sometimes he'd glance over, watching as I fitted boards together. I could feel his quiet pride, even when he didn't say a word. Weeks passed. The frame of the cabin began to rise, its shape slowly appearing against the horizon. The first wall we built together almost collapsed in a storm that rolled in overnight. Rain poured so hard that the ground turned to mud, and the wind tore at the tarp we had hung. We spent hours holding it down, soaked to the bone, laughing at the chaos. When the storm passed, the wall still stood. Somehow, so did we. Every plank of wood I lifted reminded me of something from the past. Every harsh word, every look of disappointment, every time I had been told I wasn't enough. I poured all of it into the work. The cabin grew taller, stronger, a mirror of what was happening inside me. We called it Evergreen. It wasn't big, but it felt alive. The walls were made from reclaimed barn wood we found at a nearby farm, worn smooth by time. Solar panels lined the roof. We built a system to collect rainwater that flowed through copper pipes Ethan designed himself. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and salt. Every nail, every corner, every beam held a piece of me that refused to give up. Some nights, we sat by the fire outside, watching the stars appear one by one. Ethan would talk about future plans, maybe expanding the cabin, planting a garden, building another one for someone else. I didn't always answer. Sometimes I just listened to the crackle of the fire and the rhythm of the waves in the distance. When the last piece of wood was set and the roof sealed tight, I stood back and looked at what we had built. The cabin glowed under the soft afternoon light, strong and simple, exactly what I had dreamed of years ago. I ran my hand along the doorway, the wood still warm from the sun, and a quiet thought crossed my mind. They gave her $150,000, I whispered, my voice steady. I built mine from nothing. When the cabin was finally complete, I took a single photo. The afternoon light fell through the trees, touching the wooden walls with a soft glow. It wasn't perfect, a few boards still uneven, a small patch of dirt near the porch, but it was real. I stood at the edge of the clearing, phone in hand, and posted it online with a simple caption. Built this myself. No hashtags, no long explanation, just those 3 quiet words. I didn't think much of it. My phone stayed on the counter while I cleaned the tools and swept sawdust from the floor. By evening, a few notifications started popping up. Then more. Comments poured in, strangers, builders, even local magazines sharing the photo. People wanted to know how I did it, what materials I used, where the cabin was. Someone wrote, "This isn't just a house. It's strength." By morning, the post had spread through the whole region. My inbox filled with messages, offers for interviews, requests for designs, people saying they felt inspired. It felt unreal, like watching a version of my life I'd once dreamed about finally begin to exist. For years, I had worked quietly, always behind others, always unnoticed. Now, people saw something I created with my own hands. And they saw me. Ethan smiled when he saw the attention. "Looks like your work's finally speaking louder than their words," he said, tapping my phone screen. I laughed softly, embarrassed by all the praise. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," I said. He shrugged. "Maybe not, but it looks like you did anyway." That week felt lighter. I started sleeping better, eating without guilt, waking up with ideas instead of doubts. The land felt like mine in a way no place ever had. Every morning, the sunlight filtered through the tall trees and hit the cabin roof just right, as if nature itself approved. For the first time, I didn't think about my parents or what they would say. I just worked, built, lived. But peace doesn't always last. One afternoon, I was sanding the porch railing when I heard tires crunching over gravel. A car turned slowly into the clearing, sleek, silver, too clean for the dirt road. My chest tightened when I saw it. I knew that car. My father's BMW. The door opened, and Jessica stepped out first. She looked smaller than I remembered, her perfect hair a little tangled, her hand shaking as she held her phone. Her eyes moved over the cabin, the porch, the panels, the little sign that said Evergreen, and then settled on me. "Jess," I said, lowering the sander. She swallowed hard, her voice unsteady. "Dad, you need to come here. Now." Her words weren't meant for me. She was talking into her phone, but her eyes didn't leave my face. The world went still for a moment. The ocean breeze stopped, the trees stood quiet. I didn't move. I just stood there, covered in sawdust, staring at my sister, the one who had everything handed to her, now standing in front of something I built from nothing. She lowered the phone slowly, her expression caught somewhere between shock and guilt. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The cabin said everything for me. Jessica stood frozen, staring at the cabin as if she couldn't believe it was real. Her eyes moved slowly over every wall, every window, every inch of proof that I had built a life on my own. I took off my gloves and walked toward her. She didn't step back, just watched me, her lips trembling. "You live here?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," I said simply. Her eyes watered. "They said you ran off, that you lost everything." I almost smiled. Guess they were wrong. For a moment, she looked like the same sister I'd once stayed up late with, sharing secrets in the dark. But the years had carved distance between us. Her perfect world had cracks now. Her shoulders sagged, and the confidence she used to wear like perfume was gone. She glanced around again, her voice breaking. "I don't even know where to start. After my marriage fell apart, I moved back home. Mom and Dad, they still treat me like I'm 15. They pay the bills, make my choices, and I just let them. I didn't know how to live without their approval. I leaned against the porch rail, listening quietly. She wasn't confessing to me, she was confessing to herself. They never stopped comparing us," she continued. "Even after you left. They still talk about you like you're a warning." Her laugh was soft, bitter. "Mom says, don't end up like your sister, always chasing impossible things." I took a breath. They were wrong about that too. Her eyes filled with tears. "You were always the strong one. I just didn't see it." I shook my head gently. "No, Jess. We were both trapped in the same lesson. You were taught to depend on love. I was taught to earn it. Neither of us ever stood a chance. She covered her face, crying quietly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have stood up for you back then." I stepped closer and touched her arm lightly. "It's okay. You were trying to survive too." We stood in silence for a while. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and salt. For the first time in years, there was no anger between us, just understanding. The kind that comes too late, but still matters. She wiped her eyes and looked toward the horizon. "They're on their way," she said softly. "Mom and Dad?" I asked. She nodded. "They followed me here. I didn't mean for this to happen. I wanted to see if what I heard was true." I sighed and looked toward the road. The last time I'd seen their faces, I'd walked away from them without looking back. Now, after everything, they were coming here, to the home I built from the silence they left me. Jessica took a step closer. "What are you going to say to them?" I watched the first faint glow of headlights breaking through the trees. "I don't know yet," I said quietly. "But whatever it is, it'll be honest." The air grew still as the car rolled closer. The same silver BMW, just like before. Only this time, I wasn't the girl sitting quietly at their table. I was standing on my own ground, ready to face the ghosts I'd already outgrown. The car came to a stop at the edge of the gravel drive. The door opened, and my father stepped out first, shoulders stiff, eyes sharp. My mother followed, clutching her purse like a shield. Jessica stayed behind them, her head down. The air felt heavy, thick with everything we'd never said. My father looked around, taking in the cabin, the open land, the solar panels gleaming in the light. His jaw tightened. "Where did you get the money for all this?" he demanded. "You expect me to believe you built it yourself?" I didn't flinch. "That's exactly what I did." He took a step closer, pointing at the cabin. "You did this to make us look small. You always needed attention, even as a kid." I met his stare. "You called me a failure. Every word, every look, every moment you dismissed me. That's what built this. I used the silence you gave me as fuel." His mouth opened, then closed. For once, he had no quick answer. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We only wanted what's best for you," she said quietly. I let out a tired laugh. "No, you wanted what made you look best. There's a difference." Ethan stepped out from the cabin then, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't say anything, just stood beside me, calm and solid. The gesture said enough. I wasn't standing alone anymore. My father's face turned red. "So this man helped you, and now you think you're better than us?" I shook my head. "No, I just learned I never needed you to define my worth." He stared at me for a long moment, his voice shaking. "We gave Jessica everything because she followed our plan." I made my own," I interrupted. "You told me I was a mistake every time I dreamed too big. But those dreams built this place." I looked around at the cabin, the trees, the land I'd worked with my own hands. "This is the life you said I'd never have." Jessica stood a few steps behind them, her eyes red. My mother turned toward her as if looking for support, but Jessica just looked away. She wasn't going to defend them this time. My father's shoulders sagged, the anger draining out of him. "Did you do all this for revenge?" he asked softly. "No," I said. "Revenge would mean I still care what you think." He blinked, as if the words hit harder than he expected. My mother covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. No one spoke for a long moment. Even the wind seemed to wait. Finally, I stepped back. "You can go now. I don't owe you forgiveness. I just needed you to see what strength looks like when it's not bought." My father nodded once, a broken, quiet gesture. They turned back to the car without another word. Jessica gave me one last look. Not pity, but something closer to respect. When the car disappeared down the road, I exhaled slowly. Ethan reached for my hand. "They finally saw you," he said. I looked at the cabin glowing under the fading light. "No," I said softly. "I finally saw myself." A week passed before anything else arrived from them. The mornings were quiet, the air soft with the smell of pine and rain. Then one day, a cream-colored envelope appeared in the mailbox. My name was written on it in my father's neat handwriting. No return address. No warning. I carried it inside and sat at the table, the paper heavy in my hands. For a long time, I just looked at it, unsure if I even wanted to open it. But curiosity won. Inside was a single folded page and an old photograph. Our family house back in Colorado, now with a for sale sign out front. The letter was short. My father's words were shaky, uneven. We loved you in the wrong way. Through fear, through comparison. We thought we were teaching you strength, but we only taught you distance. We're selling the house and starting over. Wherever we go next, we want to learn how to love better. We are proud of you. I read it twice, waiting for anger or tears, but neither came. I felt calm, almost weightless. I folded the letter back up and placed it in a small wooden box by the window. There was nothing left to say. The apology couldn't erase the years, but it didn't have to. I had already built peace for myself. Outside, the sun was setting, streaking the sky with gold and lavender. I picked up a small sapling Ethan had brought home the day before. A young cedar, its roots still wrapped in damp burlap. I walked to the edge of the porch where the soil was soft and knelt down. Slowly, I dug a hole and set the tree into the earth. Ethan came out, wiping his hands on his jeans. He watched me for a moment, then walked over carrying a small walnut box. Inside it lay a simple wooden ring, smooth and warm, carved from the first tree we had cut to build the cabin. He held it out to me and smiled. "Wendy Bennett," he said softly, "will you keep building with me?" I laughed, tears stinging my eyes. "Only if we draw the blueprint together." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and I leaned against him, watching the small tree sway in the evening wind. The forest around us rustled like it was breathing with us, alive, forgiving, full of quiet strength. I looked at the cabin, glowing in the fading light, and whispered the truth I'd been carrying all along. "They gave her $150,000, I said. "They gave me silence. But silence became my foundation. Because sometimes revenge isn't about making them pay. It's about letting them see you happy, without needing their approval. Do you think I made the right choice by leaving my parents behind and starting over? Or should I have opened the door when they tried to make things right? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Share what you'd have done in my place down in the comments. And if my story connected with you, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.